On this channel, we are not AEW fans religiously as we are WWE. And I'll admit that I don't watch Dynamite and Collision as often as I do Raw and SmackDown. But any chance I get to attend pro wrestling events at their highest level, I take advantage of that. And this past week, myself, as well as a friend who isn't a pro wrestling fan, attended AEW Full Gear 2024 from the Prudential Center in Newark, New Jersey. This review isn't going to be a match-by-match star rating or a technical review of all the action in the ring, but an overall review of my trip to AEW Full Gear, things I liked, things I didn't like, and also the perspective of a friend of mine who isn't a pro wrestling fan but has attended a few pro wrestling events throughout the years as essentially what an onlooker would think of these events who isn't necessarily a hardcore fan, maybe like you and I. We'll start this event with arriving in Newark, New Jersey. Now, I arrived early in the day so I could park my car and take the train and over to New York City itself, spend some time in Manhattan, one of the best cities in the world, obviously, and then come back before the show on the train, see the show, get in the car, and head the 4 hours home back to Syracuse, New York. Now, one thing I noticed outside the arena just a few blocks away was a commissioned mural on the side of a building commemorating AEW Full Gear. And I think that's really cool, and it's really cool for a few reasons. One, I'm not really into the digital advertising and the digital artwork because it shows that there is no commitment in that, right? Anything that's digital on a billboard shows that it can just be made for 5 seconds and gone away without really any effort. It doesn't have any kind of permanency, right? You can advertise a game or a concert or really anything that's not even that important if it's digital because it's so fleeting, it's so cheap to do, and it's something that, like I said, can come and go and cost really no money to create. But a painting on a side of a building, well, it's got to be painted, right? It's got to be commissioned. It's got to be done with some sort of permanency. And even if it's going to be painted over eventually, it has some sort of time that it is going to be there. And that really makes this event feel special. That someone felt it important enough to essentially make a painting on the side of a building to commemorate it. Because the Prudential Center, just like any other arena, has something every night. Concerts, college basketball, the New Jersey Devils, various events. But for this painting to be on the side of a building, what it showed to people like myself and people like my friend who isn't a wrestling fan is that this isn't just another event on the ever-changing pro wrestling calendar of AEW or WWE, but this is something that is special. This is something that stands out. This is something unique. This is something that is specific, right? AEW Dynamite is every Wednesday. AEW Collision is every Saturday. But AEW Full Gear is once a year, and it is only one time in the year 2024, and this is the location it's going to be in. It's a cool spot to get a picture of the mural, to get a picture with the mural, and it's like a souvenir, and it makes you, I guess, commemorate the event, right? The Magic Kingdom at Disney World, you get a picture in front of that or of that because there's only one place in the whole world you can get a picture of Magic Kingdom at Disney World, and that's at Disney World. And crazy enough, right? There's only one place in the whole world I could get an AEW Full Gear mural picture with Jon Moxley and Orange Cassidy portrayed with their logos on the mural to commemorate this once-in-a-lifetime event. Because even if you attend wrestling all the time, there's only one AEW Full Gear 2024, and to have something specific to that one-day event is really cool. To add to that sentiment is the merchandise inside the arena. Right? AEW, just like WWE, loves to have pay-per-view specific merchandise. And AEW had some Full Gear hoodies and shirts and hats and posters. And the cool thing about those is that it is a one-time event. This t-shirt, this hat is being made specifically for this show. This isn't just an I Was There shirt that lists every single Raw on the back that WWE will go to this year or every single Dynamite appearance that AEW will go to, right? This isn't just a shirt that says I was there with a generic 2024 on the back to signify you went to some pro wrestling event this year. It signifies you went to this specific pro wrestling event at this specific location, and again, that makes this feel more special. This makes it feel like if you don't go to AEW tonight and you go tomorrow, you're going to a whole different event. This specific event, these specific matches are happening just once in a lifetime, and pay-per-views really got it, really hone in on that market and hone in on that idea that, these events are exactly just once in a lifetime events, and it makes it more special. Again, bringing my fan who isn't a pro wrestling fan, he got to go to something that was and felt special. So I appreciate AEW for doing that. As for all the people that talk about AEW attendance, it's no doubt that they struggle during TV shows, right? I went to AEW Collision a few weeks ago, and there's probably under 2,000 to 3,000 people in the arena. And that's an arena I've been to many times for WWE and been there for 10, 11, or even more thousand people at the MVP Arena in Albany, New York. So to see 2,000 people in Buffalo or in Wilkes-Barre or in Albany, it is no secret that versus WWE, AEW struggles with attendance. But as for pay-per-views, not so much. The Prudential Center in Newark, New Jersey, I was there for the second time ever. I went there once for WWE Backlash in 2018, and I went there for Full Gear. And I can tell you, the feeling at both of those events when it comes to the enthusiasm of the crowd, the size of the crowd, and just the overall feeling of being at a big event were matched. I will say AEW Full Gear was a much better pay-per-view than Backlash 2018, because that was historically considered one of the worst WWE pay-per-views of all time, with the main event being Roman Reigns and Samoa Joe in a non-title bout. AEW Full Gear was a much better overall event than that, and I do appreciate AEW, specifically in comparison of WWE nowadays, still having the legitimate sets, the legitimate pyro, really putting on an event that feels like a old big WWE event. We all know about the small screens, and I'm a fan of the small screens when you're selling the arenas out fully and you're showcasing the crowd. But if you watch Raw and SmackDown every single week, you know that the crowd shots are exactly the same, and most of these attendants are pretty similar. Yes, they might be bigger than past, but overall, the small sets for Raw and SmackDown on a weekly basis are not needed to fit more people in the arenas. They are done to save time, to save money, and to essentially be a cheaper alternative, right, for TKO in terms of WWE. AEW Full Gear had a decent size set, an old Raw and SmackDown similar looking set, and I appreciate them still doing that, and I appreciate also them still having decent fireworks and pyro, and even during the intro for the tag team championship match that kicked off the pay-per-view, having a live metal band perform the House of Black's theme song. Just those little touches, go a long way, especially again if you're with somebody like who I was, not a big pro wrestling fan, to just feel like they're at something that feels like a big event. And another thing that I'm going to say that I love about AEW existing, whether you like it or not, is the fact that you get to go to this event that to the naked eye doesn't look any different than a WWE event to a non-wrestling fan. But the difference is good seats, low prices. I had a 100 level seat ticket for AEW Full Gear that would run you roughly $300 if you were attending WWE Survivor Series or any of these past arena pay-per-views. I got that for 10 times less that price. $30 at the box office, day of show, got me a lower level seat where I could see all the action, could see all the screens, no obstruction. And, hey, you can say, well, AEW isn't as good as WWE if you're a big WWE fan. You can say AEW is better than WWE. But the point is, if you're a fan of both, like myself, it is refreshing to be able to go to a pay-per-view event, a event that a company is putting on their best show, their best performance. They're not holding back on the presentation. They're not holding back on the matches. They're not holding back on really any of the product because it is their signature event, and you can go to that for $30 and have a good seat. There is something to be said about that. And while I'll still prefer WWE for the most part, it is nice to be able to attend an event like this, especially when you're not as hardcore of a fan. Right now, as we've learned with WrestleMania ticket prices, WWE is kind of taking advantage of the branding and taking advantage of the fact that they know you want to watch them versus the others, so they're charging you that price. AEW obviously cannot do that because of where they sit on the totem pole or the rankings of pro wrestling. But it is nice, again, to be able to attend a pro wrestling event, a big-time one at that, at a very reasonable price. So I appreciate that from AEW. Now let's talk about the matches in general, and this is where I have a little bit of a gripe. And AEW at one time had a lot less pay-per-views than they do now, but they're bordering on having one a month, just like WWE. And I think it's time, if it hasn't been already, to really shrink these shows down. I love wrestling. I love pro wrestling. I attended Full Gear. I attend WrestleMania. I attend Monday Night Raws. I attend house shows and independent shows. So there's really no getting around it. I'm not trying to be a fan of one or the other. I love it all. But what I can say unbiasedly is that wrestling events in general just don't need to be as long as they are. And it kind of ruins the specialness when they are that long. And some takeaways, not just from the length of the show in general, but in just the idea that you are putting on matches that would serve better on other pay-per-views. What I mean by that is Ricochet's match, similar to Kyle Fletcher's and Will Ospreay's match, has that high-flying kind of cruiserweight, middleweight element to it, and it's the same similar style. And it kind of takes away because Ricochet's match started around 10:45 for the International Championship, and it was a match that, even as good as it was, is going to not essentially get as much credit because it's coming about an hour after the Will Ospreay and Kyle Fletcher match, which I think was the match of the night. WWE's been really good about not having the same style twice in one night, right? If you have a Hell in a Cell match be on the pay-per-view, you're not going to have another Hell in a Cell match. Or even when they do two kinds of matches, like the Royal Rumbles, right? Each Royal Rumble is presented differently, right? Each Royal Rumble might have the number one person thrown out right away while the number one person in the other lasts the whole time. Or like with upcoming Survivor Series and War Games, each War Games match with the women's and the men's will feel somewhat differently. But having two matches that are the same style of match, right, and trying to do some of the same moves don't have the effect. We've learned this in wrestling. If you hit someone over the head with a chair 150 times, then it's going to really lose its luster when the next time you just hit them once. Right? I said that to my friend who's a big horror movie fan, and we recently watched the movie Terrifier, where they kill people the same way that you breathe, and that is, it means nothing, it has no effect, and essentially takes away from all kind of meaning in the kills, right? And the same could be said for pro wrestling, and WWE, I think, knows that very well, in that the story and the impact of things mean a lot more, right? All these companies that throw people through flaming tables on the opening match of the card, no disrespect to them, but you're going to be less impacted by seeing someone thrown off the top of the World Trade Center through a flaming glass table if they do that at every single event. So the fact that, AEW has similar style matches on the card can sometimes take away from some of the matches and their importance and their impact. And the fact that this card had 12 matches, 3 pre-show matches, 9 main show matches, really can exhaust the fans. Now, I got to the arena a little bit early only because New York City traffic and New York City public transportation makes you get to events or plan for events earlier. And frankly, the trains all left on time and my transportation was without issue. So I got there maybe a little bit sooner than I cared to get there because I had no care about being there during the pre-show, only for the fact that I knew that this pay-per-view event was going to be so long that I was going to get my money's worth by just showing up at 8 o'clock. But I saw all the pre-show matches with the exception of the Anna Jay, Deonna Purrazzo opener. And that was the only match on this entire card that didn't last at least 10 minutes of time. And if you're going to have 9 matches on your main card, you're going to have some matches that are shorter, that have less impact, less importance. But AEW, to their fault, don't do that. Every match is important. Every match is the main event of WrestleMania. And that can be good in an aspect, but bad in another aspect because, again, it just wears you down and it takes you out of matches that may be awesome, but you're not appreciating them if it's match number 8 on a 9-match card and it's another 30-minute match. It's another match that's lasting very long, that's got a ton of false finishes, that just doesn't need to go that long to tell that story. A good example of that, right, is Swerve Strickland and Bobby Lashley. A match that's not the main event, but we all know the next match is the main event, and it's going on at like 11:15 at night. The pay-per-view is long, and at 11:15 at night, when fans have got there at 6:30 or 7 o'clock, so we're talking you've been sitting for almost 5 hours, don't want to watch a match that's just starting, knowing the main event is next, and that's probably going to go lengthy, at 11:15 at night, right? It takes away to the importance of that match. People like myself are sitting there going, let's get this over with so we can get to the main event, because we already know we're not leaving here until midnight. So let's just get to it, because we don't want to leave here at 12:30, 1 o'clock in the morning. We want to leave here at somewhat of a decent time, being midnight, right? So, having Bobby Lashley versus Swerve Strickland on a card where it gets more time to breathe and has more importance, I think would be better for the card, would be better for the match. And I think Tony Khan's downfall is he wants and lets everyone go out and just put on lengthy matches and put on their best show. Because the wrestlers, right, they want to go out there and they want to showcase. But the problem with developing a wrestling card as a whole is that's not how you can develop wrestling cards, because, again, they become too long. Back in the day when I started watching wrestling, WrestleMania cards might be 9 matches and events might be 4 hours long. But other than that, right, pay-per-view match cards that had 9 matches on the card had a lot of very short matches on those cards because they still ended in a 2.5-hour time frame. WrestleMania 15, if you recall, WrestleMania 15, WrestleMania, like I'm focusing on that being WrestleMania, right? 2.5 hours still, right? And that's your showcase event, right? Or even, let's say, WrestleMania 17, which was a huge event in front of a stadium, still only about 3.5 hours long, with the main event starting at the top of the last hour, right? So an event like Full Gear, where your main event doesn't start until 11:30, 11:40 at night, it's just not necessary, and it takes away from the important feeling. And more importantly, bringing a friend of mine who isn't a wrestling fan but loves to watch things that are entertaining and feels that wrestling, like anything else, can be entertaining. You don't always have to know the stories. You don't always have to know the reasons why. You don't even have to know who the people are. If a wrestling match is entertaining, it can appeal to anyone. And my friend, it appealed to him from pretty much 7 to 11. He loved Will Ospreay and Kyle Fletcher. And he actually even loved the main event between Jon Moxley and Orange Cassidy because it was different than Will Ospreay versus Kyle Fletcher, right? But the length of the event can wear. And when you see match after match, it's like wrestling plus wrestling plus wrestling. We get it. There's not really a ton you can do with pro wrestling in that regard to make it vastly different from match to match. So I like what WWE's doing nowadays with a 5-match card where every match has importance. You don't have to have everyone on every card. For example, Cody Rhodes' championship match is not happening at Survivor Series. It's happening following Survivor Series, and I think AEW should take a page just a little bit out of that book. They don't have to have short matches. They can keep the matches at the length that they are. Just make less of them. That way the matches have more importance. That way the fans don't get burned out. That way I can bring someone who isn't a fan of pro wrestling to an event, but he can see why pro wrestling appeals to me, and he can appreciate it as an outsider looking in. My one friend who went to War Games with me, who's the same friend who's not a pro wrestling fan, enjoyed War Games probably more than he enjoyed Full Gear because there was only like 5 matches on the card. 2 of them were like main event matches. The other matches that weren't War Games matches weren't 25-minute, 5-star, masterpieces. They were kind of just matches to get to the next War Games. Kept everything in a tight 3-hour window, and we got to get home at a reasonable hour. So with my complaints of AEW, it's simply very lengthy cards, matches that somehow get lost in the shuffle because of the length, and also, 2, the fact that, I do appreciate with these lengthy cards, AEW rushes from match to match to match, so I like that, but I also say you wouldn't have to do that if you didn't have so many matches on the card. So I wish AEW would probably have less matches on their pay-per-view cards, maybe a little more filler between the matches, like video packages or backstage interviews, and a big thing, part of their cards being so long, are this. I didn't see the Darby Allin car crash, right? I didn't even see the Christian Cage, Hangman Adam Page segment because it was 11:55 at night when that stuff happened, and after being in an arena for 5 hours plus, it was just time to go. And if I had only been in the arena for maybe 2.5 hours or even 3 hours, I would have probably been in there until they kicked me out. But as somebody who had been in the arena for a very long period of time, who'd watched a lot of matches, now I would have maybe stayed if I knew that stuff was going to happen, but you don't know. And I wasn't willing to stay another 15 minutes to find out because the pay-per-view itself had already been so lengthy. So that's essentially my takeaway. I will say Will Ospreay and Kyle Fletcher put on an amazing match. And I don't care if you're a WWE diehard. I think Will Ospreay is the best wrestler in the world right now. I like that I could go to see him for $30. I like that AEW exists so that I can see people like him put on a clinic like he did with Kyle Fletcher. And listen, I love The Rock and Roman Reigns and Cody Rhodes and the stories they tell in WWE, but I also like 5-star wrestling matches, and that's what's awesome about being a wrestling fan, right? Because there shouldn't be this tribalism. We don't have to pick teams. We don't have to pick sides. This isn't AEW versus WWE. This is pro wrestling. And what I can say for those at home, if you know who Jon Moxley is, or you know who Claudio Gastonoli is, or if you know who Cody Rhodes is, you're a pro wrestling fan, and you're in the minority in this world, because the majority of people in this world are not. And while wrestling is very popular amongst wrestling fans and even into the mainstream, it still isn't the National Football League. It still isn't mainstream college football, right? It still isn't Jake Paul versus Mike Tyson, okay? So the fact that you're in this somewhat small community of pro wrestling fans should show you that you should find more commonality amongst each other and more things to share and more things to enjoy with each other than against each other. Because on the outside world, to those who aren't pro wrestling fans, which is probably 6 out of 10 people in the world, they don't care about AEW versus WWE. They think it's kind of silly that you fight amongst each other because to them it's all the same. So to us, we should embrace wrestling. We should embrace the fact that we can go see a professional wrestling event for a reasonable ticket in arenas across the world, and that while WrestleMania will always be WrestleMania, we still have the opportunities to enjoy wrestling on a vastly, multitudely different amount of scales. And I appreciate that, because while I'll be at the Royal Rumble and while I'll be at WrestleMania in these massive arenas for these high ticket dollar prices, I'll also be at these small events too, because pro wrestling has many facets, and like I said at the start of this video, any chance I get to watch pro wrestling at its highest level, I'm going to take. And I'm not going to lie, Will Ospreay is one of, if not the best wrestler in the world, and I am not going to not take advantage to see him. And to see things like we saw with Jon Moxley versus Orange Cassidy in a great main event, or to see a tag team match at the start with awesome characters and cool spots, or to see people like Mercedes Moné on the card as well, right? So, AEW Full Gear, I'm going to give it a thumbs up as somebody who attended the event, enjoyed myself thoroughly. I would say, though, if you could get yourself down to that 3-hour window, it would be a brilliant event, and I would be probably more than willing to bring a lot of my non-wrestling friends and family to these major events to show them why I like wrestling so much and why I think it's so cool, and why maybe they would be able to appreciate it too if they didn't have to sit in an arena for like 5 hours long. That's pretty lengthy, right? An NFL game, a Major League Baseball game, college basketball, not those lengths of time. Pro wrestling doesn't need to be either.